All right, everybody, welcome to this very brief and yet really important addendum to the Jewish Statue of Liberty discussion. After I uploaded that video earlier today, it hit me, oh, son of a gun, I didn't mention a very important point that I intended to include. So here it is. I had to get this in here. Just to show how long our little Zio buddies have paid homage to the bitch in the clouds, to this female goddess fetish of theirs. The Statue of Liberty, guys, goes back to ancient times in various forms and under different names, but the same idea. She was known in ancient times, amongst other titles that were given her, as the Queen of Heaven. We see her showing up in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7, verse 18. And before I even read this verse, I got to mention what's going on here is an example, one of so many examples. I'm actually going to do a video series on this coming up about dissension within the ranks of Judaism, right? How there's been a great many internal disagreements that have gone on over the centuries over various ideologies or various schools of thought within the Judaic community. You know, you had the scribes and the Pharisees at each other's throats. You had the Essenes that came along later and were at odds with those two groups. You had the priestly line that was often going at it tooth and nail with the royal line. And then ultimately, the third faction got disgusted with both of them and overthrew them both, right? Infiltrated them, orchestrated reformations and revolutions, Anyway, what was going on in this passage clearly is an example, an early example of the third faction, which has been focused around, occultism, the Kabbalah, pushing that to undermine the power of the priesthood, right? And the kingly powers as well. But mostly to attack the priesthood, because don't forget, that was the more dominant force. It had authority over the kings. And that's why during the Dark Ages, it was the priestly bloodline that was first attacked, right? The Protestant Reformation preceded all of the other revolutions that were later used to take down the kingly thrones. They started with the church first, the priestly bloodline, right? Anyway, so this is what was going on here. This passage we're going to read from Jeremiah 7, verse 18. This was the third faction trying to undermine the priesthood following, the books of Moses. They were introducing this goddess worship, and a lot of the people in Jewland, a lot of the Israelites were into this religion. And so here you have the priestly line condemning this as horrifyingly evil and using the threat of their God, Yahweh, to come down on the heads of the Israelites for rebelling. And so every time something would go wrong in Jewland, when they would get taken into captivity or whatnot, the priesthood used the excuse that it's because you're not following Yahweh and his commands. You're following this third faction and their heresies. That's why so they were trying to win the people over to their side. You can see this internal dissension thing going on. I'll get into that in more detail down the line. But anyway, here's how this passage reads, because it introduces literally, the Statue of Liberty, an early version thereof. Don't forget the Statue of Liberty with that little radiating sunburst behind her head, and the fact that they have her put up so high on this pedestal so that you're looking up to her. She's the Queen of Heaven looking down, right, with the sunburst behind her head. That's her, the Queen Bitch. And she popped up at other periods in Jewish history, too. We'll look at another one in a minute, but let's start with this one here, because this goes back, to around the 5th, 6th century BC. Here it is, Jeremiah 7:18. It says, the children gather wood the fathers light the fire, and the women knead the dough and make cakes to offer them to the Queen of Heaven. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to arouse my anger. This is Yahweh, supposedly speaking here, condemning this practice, right? The third faction was introducing this, and again, to undermine the priesthood. And so the priesthood now was using their power of, the written word of God, to get the people to turn against this and to come back to, following Mosaic law, which forbids the worship of other gods. But here we can see that this worship of the, quote, Queen of Heaven, i.e., Statue of Liberty, goes back quite a ways. Now let's look at her rearing her head many centuries later during the Dark Ages. I'm going to read here a quote from a Catholic publication that I used to subscribe to, just because I wanted to keep tabs on what they were up to with their latest BS. And I found it quite interesting. I took a lot of juicy quotes out of this publication over the years that I subscribed to it back in the 90s. It was called The Fatima Crusader. Here's one quote from it. St. John Damascene says that to serve Mary and be her courtier is the greatest honor that we can possibly possess. For to serve the Queen of Heaven is already to reign there in heaven. To serve who? The Queen of Heaven. Here we have the Jews running the Catholic Church, bringing up this bitch again in the form of Mary, but notice they're referring to her once again as the Queen of Heaven, who was often represented with a bright sunbeam behind her head, both in the form of Mary and earlier on in the time of Jeremiah that we just read, right? Also represented with the sunburst behind her head. Very interesting, isn't it? So we have these two allusions to this mother goddess figure, and even though they came under different names, this Queen of Heaven in the book of Jeremiah wasn't called Mary, but notice they're both given the same title, Queen of Heaven. It's the same bitch goddess, right? And so it is with the Statue of Liberty, the Queen of Heaven. Anyway, like I said, short video, but a very important addendum that I wanted to get out there. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll catch you in the next video. Take care.